This story, originating from Saharanpur, India, was shared by Iram, whose grandmother recounted it. It revolves around an incident that took place nearly half a century ago involving her grandfather's brother-in-law, Farhan, a businessman known for his confidence, frequent travels and adaptability. Farhan, like most businessmen of his time, would often travel by train or bus, regardless of the time of day. He was pragmatic, undeterred by the late hours or isolation that accompanied his journeys. One fateful night, Farhan boarded a train bound for a small, remote village where he had some business to attend to. The train was scheduled to stop briefly at a station around 12:30 a.m. Farhan was unaware of the sinister reputation this station held. Locals had long whispered about it being haunted, especially by a malevolent entity that targeted lone travelers. The station was located far from the village, typical of colonial-era railway stations, which were often built on the outskirts of settlements to minimize disruption from noise and vibrations. These isolated locations, however, also made them prime settings for eerie tales. That night, as the train approached the station, Farhan gathered his small briefcase and prepared to alight. When the train came to a halt, Farhan stepped onto the dimly lit platform, noticing immediately how deserted it was. The usual bustling activity of porters, vendors, and passengers was completely absent. Even the station master, who was supposed to oversee arrivals and departures, was nowhere to be found. Farhan was the only person to disembark. The train let out a long whistle and began to move again, leaving Farhan alone. The silence of the station was deafening. The only sounds were the faint rustle of leaves in the distance and the rhythmic chugging of the train as it faded into the night. The platform lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows that made the station appear even more forlorn. Though uneasy, Farhan tried to dismiss the eerie atmosphere as a result of fatigue. He scanned the area, confirming the name of the station on the signboard. It matched his ticket. He had arrived at the right place. Yet the absence of any human presence unsettled him. Deciding not to linger, he moved towards the narrow staircase that led down to the village road. In the past, this area would have been bustling with tongas, horse-drawn carts that ferried passengers to the village. But that night, the space was empty. Farhan stepped onto the paved road that stretched ahead, bordered on both sides by open fields. The night was still, and the darkness seemed to close in around him as he walked. As he continued down the road, a peculiar sound broke the silence. It was the faint jingle-jingle of anklets, soft but distinct. Farhan froze momentarily, straining his ears to confirm if he had really heard something. The sound persisted, faint but deliberate, as if someone was walking behind him. Alarmed, Farhan quickened his pace. The jingling matched his steps, growing louder as he walked faster. He slowed down, and so did the sound. It was as though an unseen presence was mimicking his movements. Elders often warned about strange encounters during the dead of night, advising never to turn around if one felt followed. Farhan recalled these warnings, but the urge to confirm his suspicions grew overpowering. Against his better judgment, he turned his head slightly to glance back. What he saw made his blood run cold. A woman in white was following him. Her attire resembled that of a traditional bride. She wore heavy gold jewelry, including thick bangles, a large nose ring, and an ornate necklace. A golden tikka adorned her forehead. At first glance, she appeared regal, almost beautiful, but her face was unnerving. Her features were distorted. Her mouth was unnaturally wide, her eyes impossibly large, and her smile sinister. Farhan couldn't see her legs clearly but felt an overwhelming dread. The jingle-jingle of her anklets grew louder, signaling her proximity. Terrified, Farhan broke into a run. The woman's anklets mirrored his frantic steps, their sound growing louder as though she was closing in on him. Farhan didn't dare look back again, but could feel her presence almost breathing down his neck. His heart pounded as he sprinted down the road, driven by sheer fear. After what felt like an eternity, Farhan collided with two men walking along the road. He fell to the ground, trembling and gasping for breath. The men helped him up, their expressions concerned. "Brother, are you all right?" "What's wrong?" one of them asked. Struggling to speak, Farhan stammered, A woman. She was following me. Her face. It wasn't human." The men exchanged uneasy glances. One of them lit a matchstick to look around, but there was no one else on the road. "You're safe now," one of them said reassuringly. You've left her territory. That woman, she's no ordinary being. She's a witch, and she haunts the area near the station. The men explained that the station had been abandoned for years due to its sinister reputation. Locals avoided alighting there at night, especially alone. The witch was said to appear only to lone travelers, often taking the form of a bride to lure them. Those who had seen her described her as both mesmerizing and horrifying, her backward feet hidden under her flowing garments. You're lucky to have escaped, one of the men added gravely. Most who encounter her don't survive. She preys on fear, and once she locks onto someone, it's almost impossible to shake her off. Farhan listened in stunned silence as the men recounted other chilling tales about the witch. They offered to accompany him to his destination, ensuring his safety for the remainder of the journey. The witch's domain. Over time, Farhan learned more about the legends surrounding the station. The witch, believed to be a female jinn or a human who had gained supernatural powers through dark rituals, was said to inhabit the desolate area near the tracks. Such entities often chose isolated places to avoid detection. She was known for her beauty and allure, which she used to deceive unsuspecting victims. Yet her grotesque features and backward feet betrayed her true nature. Witches like her were said to gain their powers through horrifying practices, including consuming human flesh. Villagers had long since stopped using the station at night. They believed that traveling in groups provided protection, as the witch only targeted solitary individuals. Those who survived encounters with her often reported being haunted by nightmares and an unshakable fear of the dark. Farhan never visited that station again. The memory of the witch's distorted smile and the relentless jingling of her anklets stayed with him for the rest of his life. This tale, passed down through generations, serves as both a cautionary story and a chilling reminder of the thin line between myth and reality. The story began in Sadar Bazaar, Rawalpindi, where I was living at the time. That evening, after finishing my tuition at around 10:15 p.m., I rode my bicycle home. The power went out, as it often did due to the regular load shedding in the city, but this time it was different. The entire city had plunged into darkness. The air was unusually still, yet life seemed to continue, with people walking around and the occasional car headlights cutting through the blackness. As I cycled through the deserted streets, I noticed something peculiar. Near my alley, a faint light illuminated the street, but it wasn't from a lamp. A beautiful girl stood there, dressed in a white shalwar kameez, her face radiant, with big eyes and full lips. She smiled warmly at me, almost as if she had been waiting for me. I was mesmerized by her beauty and approached her without hesitation. As I got closer, she beckoned me with open arms, inviting me to come closer. But as soon as I was about to reach her, the lights suddenly flickered back on, and she vanished without a trace. I was shaken by the encounter and rushed home, troubled by what had just happened. The next few days were filled with unease. I fell ill with a fever that lasted 3 days, but my mother seemed to understand that something unusual had occurred, even though I had no explanation for it. A few weeks later, something even stranger happened. One morning, I woke up unable to move. I could hear breathing close to me, but my body was paralyzed, and I couldn't scream for help. Eventually, I mustered enough strength to escape the paralysis and rushed outside barefoot. My mother was concerned but didn't scold me, knowing that something unusual was at play. By then, I had moved to Italy for my studies. In a shared apartment with friends, one of our roommates, Assad, moved in after some marital troubles. I was the only one who came home late at night, while the others were out during the day. One evening, Assad approached me with a strange look in his eyes and started talking about eerie occurrences in his life. He asked if I had heard anything unusual at night, but before I could respond, his voice suddenly raised, and I recognized it. It was Assad arguing with his wife. I quickly realized that I could hear voices that weren't supposed to be there. I had never met Assad's wife, but her voice sounded unmistakable. The argument escalated, and I could clearly hear every word, though Assad was not home. This left me in disbelief, wondering how I could have known so much about his private life. When I confronted him, he seemed shocked and uneasy. He swore that neither he nor his wife had been home, but everything I described about their arguments was accurate. The tension was palpable. Assad then confessed that strange things had been happening in his home, much like the events I was experiencing. He revealed that his younger brother had been involved in a terrifying incident. One night, his mother had overheard voices from his brother's room, thinking he was on the phone. But when she opened the door, she saw her son standing in front of a mirror, having a conversation with someone invisible. When his mother called out to him, he didn't respond. It was only when she shook him awake that he snapped out of it, looking furious and confused, as if something had taken control of him. This was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, his brother began showing signs of unusual behavior. He would talk to invisible people, and once, he was even seen dancing with an unseen figure. His parents sought help from doctors, but everything seemed normal physically. Yet, the strange occurrences continued, and it became clear that something supernatural was involved. The situation grew even more troubling when it was suggested that a female jinn had attached herself to Assad's brother. This jinn claimed to be married to him, even stating that they had children together. No matter what they tried, nothing could rid him of this unseen force. The family was in turmoil, and it seemed as if they were caught in a never-ending cycle of strange events. As the months passed, the incidents continued. I couldn't help but feel that the beautiful girl I had seen in the alley was somehow linked to all these occurrences. Assad's brother was not the only one affected. It seemed as though the more I delved into these unsettling experiences, the more I felt connected to them. My family, too, had been impacted, and my mother had passed away shortly after telling me that she feared the strange happenings were linked to the supernatural forces that had begun to haunt us. Now, living far away in Italy, I felt helpless, unable to do much to stop the chain of events that had started in Rawalpindi and seemed to follow me wherever I went. The memories of that night in Sadar Bazaar, the girl in the white dress, and the constant fear that followed, haunted me. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear that these incidents were not mere coincidences. I received a message from someone who had been experiencing similar disturbances for over 20 years. Despite trying everything, they couldn't find a solution. I promised to help, just as I had been helped when I had first encountered the forces that seemed to have taken hold of my family. But deep down, I knew that only Allah could provide the ultimate answers to these mysteries that had plagued our lives for so long. The truth behind these events remained elusive. Was it the jinn? Or was it something even darker? Only time would tell.